Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining our second panel session on racial diversity in the professions then and now. I'm Hafsah Hussain. I'm a committee member for the Young Legal Aid Lawyers, and I'll be co-chairing this discussion alongside Monidipa Fouzder from the Law Society Gazette, who will be chairing the second half of the event and the kind of discussion section. Just to give a bit of a context and overview of the discussion today. Last week, for our first racial diversity panel, we heard from speakers from a range of chambers and firms about their perspectives and experiences on racial diversity. And the recording is available on our YLL website, and I really recommend everyone tuning in to check that out. And tonight's event is kind of looking at the series of actions and pointers that have come from last week's sessions, and looking at developing these conversations with our fantastic panel, who I'll be introducing shortly. The format of the event is that we'll have a brief 5-minute segment from each of the speakers, and then we'll open it up to a bit of a wider discussion with Moni, who'll be chairing the second half and taking any questions from the audience. And then towards the end, we'll have some final thoughts and a point or two that each speaker is kind of keen to take away to their colleagues and associations. So I'll start with introducing the panel before I pass on to our first speaker. We are joined by Sam Mercer, who is the Head of Policy, Equality and Diversity and CSR at the Bar Council. We're also joined by Hekim Hannan, who is on the Executive Committee of the Law Society's Ethnic Minorities and Boys Division and the Nottinghamshire Law Society's Equality and Diversity Subcommittee, and is also solicitor at Brown Jacobson in Nottingham. We also have Jenny Agboke, who is a solicitor at HMCTS and Assistant Clerk to the Justices, and also Edwina Koroma, who is an Education Coordinator at Inner Temple, and also had the pleasure of meeting you at one of the outreach events in Leeds, and really grateful for your able to attend tonight. We also have Esme Kemp, who is Legal Director of the Immigration Law Practitioners Association, and we'll also be joined slightly later on by Laurie who is Head of Diversity at the Criminal Bar Association and is also barrister at 25 Bedford Road Chambers. So thank you everyone for agreeing to participate in our discussion, the second panel session. I'm going to invite you all to share 5 minutes or so about your perspectives, and then we'll move on to the general discussion. So I'll pass it on to you first, Sam. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much for inviting me this evening to speak. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to give a little bit of background about myself. So I always feel that I need to say I'm not a lawyer as a kind of confession in these sorts of sessions. But I've been working in equality and diversity for about 20 years now at the Bar Council for 8 years. So I'm very much a Bar Council. We work through committees like the Law Society, and Laurie, who's on the panel, is actually on one of our race groups. So hopefully she'll be able to back up some of the things I say tonight. So my job at the Bar Council is both strategic, so it's around developing our programmes, but it's also a bit more frontline. So I'm the person that sits on the end of a helpline at Bar Council when people are facing discrimination or issues in the workplace. I develop the guides to comply with rules that the BSB puts in place. And I develop and deliver equality training. So I was interested to see that the training came up a few times last week in the discussions. So I have a few things to say about that as well. Last week's session was really useful to listen to. I haven't managed to get through the whole session, so I shall go back to it after tonight's webinar to kind of listen to the rest of the discussions. But I have got some of the talking points that were raised, and I kind of put them into 3 areas. Training, I saw, was a big issue that was discussed last week. I've got mixed views on training, like some of the speakers from last week. I think some of it can be a bit tick boxy, but I do think it can be a good place to start on this agenda. And done well, I think it can make a difference. One of the most energizing things about my job is when I'm sitting in front of a bunch of barristers and you can kind of see the scales coming from their eyes as they start to think about equality and diversity in a different way. And we're just developing some anti-racism training, which we've been working on with our race working group. So I think it's it is important that we start to deliver this across the bar. I think it's important that everybody across the bar participates in some type of training on this. We talked about being an ally, I think, last week, and there was a discussion around the reverse mentoring. Now, while that is a Bar Standards Board initiative, I am familiar with it, so I'm happy to talk about that a little bit later as well. And then a lot of the other programmes that came up were around positive action, what more we can be doing. And I'm a huge fan of positive action. I think we need to be much more bold about the positive action that we put in place right across the bar. We're looking at a number of initiatives at the moment. We've just produced some guidance on positive action, and I'm really pleased that chambers are ringing me up and talking through the sorts of programmes that they want to put in place, which are quite exciting and thankfully quite bold too. So I think there are going to be some braver and more significant initiatives coming into play over the next few months. I think there's also a little bit of work that we're doing which kind of reflects on some of the discussions around progression, which I think are incredibly important. So we've been doing an enormous amount of work looking at work allocation, because I firmly believe that the work you get determines the sustainability of your career at the bar, but also your chance of progression to silk or into a judicial appointment. So I'm happy to take questions around the sorts of work that we're doing on that and what steps we're taking to make sure that work allocation is fair within a chambers context. So that's kind of me, looking forward very much to the discussion. I'm also very much in listening mode. I'm very keen to hear people's points of view and hear what more people think we should be doing at Bar Council.
Thanks so much, Sam. That introduction and kind of raising the sort of 3 key issues that have come from the event, and definitely really important ones to discuss. In particular, work allocation is something that we do have a few follow-up questions on, and also for any participants, if you do have any specific questions relating to that, we'll definitely cover those in the discussion section. Thank you so much, Sam. I'm going to move on to Hekim, and then we'll pick up on some of the points that you raised. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Hekim Hannan. I am a solicitor at Brown Jacobson, and I'm also on the executive committee for the Ethnic Minority Lawyers Division, which is one of the committees within the Law Society. I'm also on our local Nottinghamshire Ethnic Equality and Diversity committee within their Law Society, and I'm also on the firm's Diversity and Inclusion committee within the firm Brown Jacobson. A couple of things that Sam picked on, and we'll be looking at more of these later on. But one of the things was training. I think one of the important thing is training is we need to get the education somewhere. You can go away and look at things for yourself, but it's very difficult unless someone points you in the right direction and someone has gone through that or knows what to look at to say, look at this, then look at this, then look at this. You can't jump to a master's degree level of understanding if you haven't got the basic GCSE level of understanding. So it's being able to structure that training and also being able to have time to process that. You can go away, you can watch something, you can read something, but then your understanding will be limited until you go and speak to people both within your level of understanding and at a high level of understanding. And I think that's all part of the process. I think it's difficult to say to someone, okay, well, if you watch these 5 videos and you read these 6 books and you listen to these 8 podcasts, you'll be at a certain place, because you won't be, because it's about where your understanding is and what you take from that. So I think that's important. One of the other things we'll look at is allyship, which does go almost hand in hand with training. In order to be a good ally, you need a good education. You need to be able to understand the points. I think one of the things, for instance, that was in the news today was about the BBC aren't going to send celebrities to Africa anymore for part of comic relief. If you don't understand why that's a good thing and why sending celebrities to Africa was a bad thing, you're not going to be able to be a good ally. There's something else yesterday as well. I think recently a lot of people have been sharing videos about what's been happening in Nigeria. It's similar to the way people shared the George Floyd video, but I think hopefully people have moved on from that, and sharing videos of people on social media where you can see people in distress and then people either dying or dead. It's not a good thing. I mean, you have to be able to understand why that isn't a good thing. And again, that's part of education process, training, allyship as well. So they're two of the things we'll discuss later on. And we'll also I'll also talk about what we're doing nationally within the EMLD, regionally within the Nottinghamshire Law Society, and then also within the firm, who have moved on leaps and bounds. I've been there for 2.5 years, and where we started 2.5 years ago and where we are now, and where we've pushed on in the last 18 months or so, it's been really, really admirable. Thank you.
Thanks, Hekim. Yeah, definitely really important issues that you've raised alongside Sam, and kind of what you mentioned about resources and needing to understand how to actually be a good ally. And I know if you recognise what what definition that takes, everyone has different perspectives on that particular term. And I think yeah, that will definitely be really interesting to discuss. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, and we'll definitely pick up on that in the next section. I'll just pass on now to our next speaker, Jenny. Thank you again for taking part.
Hi, I'm Jenny Agboke, and I'm grateful as well for being invited, so thank you. Looking forward to the discussions. I work for HMCTS, and I am a legal advisor. My role, I came in as a trainee in 2001, so a little while ago, and have worked my way up now to senior legal manager, which in old money is deputy justice clerk. And so from that point of view, I feel very fortunate of being able to move forward and haven't felt held back in any way, unless it was covert. I haven't really been I can say that I feel quite fortunate, but I do realise that's not everybody's experience. And even as a trainee, I was interviewed by a diverse panel at the time, and I remember being quite impressed with that. I think where challenges come over the years is being in the courtroom and working with different people. And as a legal advisor, we do primarily assist the magistrates, but we also assist litigants in person. And that's where I've encountered some of the issues that came up in the last discussion, where you attempt to help somebody, a member of the public, and somebody asks you, when and where, in which country were you qualified, that kind of thing. And that's where I was kind of caught off guard, not expecting that kind of response. And, sometimes some snobbery in the courtroom. But as I've developed, I've seen less of that, to be honest. And my specialism now is family, and I used to do crime. And that's where I saw a lot of those things. I'm also in on the diversity and inclusion group, national group, and accessibility and inclusion as well within HMCTS. So we're looking at ways to improve accessibility for the public and also for staff. So I'm quite interested in the discussion on recruitment that we hopefully get into, and looking at the applications. HMCTS has come on leaps and bounds, so I'd quite like to discuss some of that, and also some of the training that we offer to magistrates and staff that is mandatory, tackling unconscious bias and stereotyping, which we're probably all guilty of at some level. What we probably need to work on is identifying and understanding the different learning styles, a bit like our last speaker said, really, because sometimes you can watch something and one person can get a lot from that and another one can't. So it's just following up on that. So I'd like to take that away, how we follow up on the training that we offer in HMCTS, and ensure that diversity is complied with. So yeah, that's basically some of my background, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion later.
Thanks so much, Jenny. And yeah, really looking forward to discussing what you mentioned about tackling unconscious bias. It's definitely something that that many of the participants last week mentioned as something that they face day to day in the courtroom. And it'd be good to hear HMCTS's perspectives on recruitment and the training to magistrates. It's definitely really interesting to discuss. So thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next speaker, which is Edwina. You want to go ahead? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hafsah, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak here. I think I'm going to kind of concentrate on the work that Ian is doing. So obviously I'm from Inner Temple. I'm one of the education coordinators at the Inn. I'm quite lucky, I would say, because I'm split between two sub-teams within the education and training department. So I kind of get to see a wide range of and interact with a wide range of people. So from our outreach events, we meet students all the time, but I also, from the professional training side, interact with new practitioners and pupils. So I think it's really important, and I wanted to concentrate on the support structures there for students and just kind of members in general. Because I think it's really important if we are thinking about having a diverse bar, that we are thinking about how we are supporting members as they are going along their journey to the bar. We are doing a lot of work at the Inn at the moment. I'm involved in the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion subcommittee and also kind of a working group. So we're currently devising a strategy as to how we're going to develop these ideas. I think we'll have some time later on within discussion to kind of put forward exactly what we're working on. But I just wanted to maybe focus on kind of a few of our initiatives at the moment. So as you said, Hafsah, we met at Insight Leeds event earlier in the year. So pre-COVID, we hold a series of Insight events into the profession. So we have practitioners discussing their journeys to the bar and taking questions from students. And we find it's really a way of demystifying kind of myths about the bar. And it's really important to kind of get out to, so we kind of travel around England and Wales. So and we go to essentially towns and cities that have at least one university. And sometimes these kind of areas haven't had representation, they have kind of had these kind of events before. So it's really important to kind of get out there and bring the bar to the students so, you know, we can demystify. I think with regards to diversity, the same kind of questions that we get asked a lot at these events is kind of, is the bar for somebody that looks like me? Can somebody like me that looks like me succeed at the bar? And it is really important. I think one of the most important things that we come across is like, you cannot be what you cannot see. And we have this, it's kind of like a running theme. And within the outreach department, it's important, you know, to diversify we find it's important to, in order to diversify the profession, we have to kind of put these initiatives so people are able to make an informed choice as to whether they come to the bar or not, and to feel included and feel kind of safe and comfortable in raising kind of any diversity issues. So essentially that's what we try to do. We have a series called In Focus. So it's, we discuss, it's like a round table that we created last year, round table event. So we focus on kind of topics that underrepresented groups of the bar may face. So previous events have been disability at the bar or being LGBT+ at the bar. And our upcoming event on the 24th of November is going to be being BAME at the bar. So it is important to have these discussions and to speak to practitioners and hear their stories and kind of figure out what's the best way to support students on their, or students and members at all levels for their journey to the bar. So I think it's important that people feel comfortable and feel they're able to discuss these issues as well, kind of going forward. So I'm really big on the idea of support networks, and that's what we're aiming to create with these series of events. So I think I'll stop there, but there are other initiatives I do want to discuss, but I think we'll pick that up as we go along in the evening.
Thanks so much, Edwina. And yeah, everything that you mentioned is sounds so positive. And one of the things that did come up last week was about kind of scholarship support and some ideas around how we can use scholarships to kind of increase engagement, but maybe looking at it in a different way. But Moni will be introducing some of the ideas that the speakers recommended. So we're good to discuss that and hear what your thoughts are. But yeah, I think in what you mentioned as well about traveling around England and Wales and engaging, and the event that I attended was in the north, and I think it's good to reach out to diverse communities that you mentioned and help them feel supported. So yeah, really positive to hear multiple kind of conversations happening across different platforms, and looking forward to discussing further. But thanks so much for introducing some of the initiatives. I'm going to move on to Esme next from ILPA. If you want to go ahead, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Just wanted to clarify that I'm not legal director at ILPA, but I'm lead on the anti-racism stuff that ILPA is doing at the moment. So just in case. So I think what I'm going to do is talk about kind of some of the stuff that ILPA has been doing over the last 6 months on this work. So ILPA is a membership organisation made up of immigration practitioners. Like the immigration system is incredibly diverse in terms of there's very small charities and advocacy organisations as well as big corporate firms, and we have a broad range of that at ILPA. So ILPA has a unique position of being able to have a broad reach across a lot of these organisations. So kind of what we've done is done a lot of listening exercises, a lot of reaching out to members to see where ILPA is best placed to make change. And myself, as a relatively new member of staff at ILPA and someone who is passionate about justice and equality, I was sparked into action after obviously the tragic killing of George Floyd, as I think a lot of us were. And I felt that ILPA wasn't doing enough to address it or to change racial inequality in the sector. So I wanted to change this. So what we initially did was we organised a task group consisting of ILPA staff and trustees. And over the last 6 months, we've been taking action and strategizing about ways we can help to make the immigration system more fair and just, not just for the people our members represent, but also for our members too, because I think that was an oversight of ILPA. So from that, our first point of action was that we designed a survey, which was called ILPA Explores Racism in the Immigration Sector. It was sent out to all our members, and we have about 750, 800 members at the moment. And it was active for 2 months. From this survey, we collected data on people's lived experience of racism and wrote up the findings in a report that we're going to publish at the end of this month. And in it, we've listed recommendations that we've pulled from the data about what ILPA can do, what our members can do, and what the immigration sector as a whole can do. And I've got a list of those recommendations. I think I'll return to those in the discussion later. I think that's when I'll bring them in. And then from that, secondly, we launched the first ever BMAE working group. We've had a lot of discussion about the term BAME and whether we think it's appropriate. And we decided to call it that for the moment as an umbrella term, and then hopefully we can split the B from the AIM and split it into separate factions, but that's what it is at the moment. And it's a collective space for BAME practitioners to share thoughts, frustrations and actions. ILPA already have a series of working groups that cover family law, economic migration, refugee and asylum, but we've never had working groups that focus specifically on identities such as gender, sexuality or race, and I think that's been an oversight. So we held our first session at the beginning of October, and I'll just highlight now some of the main themes that came out of it. So there was a lot of, we had about 80 people attending, so it was really well attended and it was a really good session. And I think a lot of people were saying they were experiencing a lot of fatigue about constantly reiterating their experiences and going over the same ground again and again on different Zoom calls and webinars on racial equality and justice. So there was a real push to make this group much more action orientated, where we could take away tangible action points that we could work on after the session. The second point that they raised was the work of unions. So I don't know if you discussed it in your session last week, but there was an encouragement for everyone to sign up to a union that they could access if there was a HR or disciplinary issue. We had feedback from the survey that we put out that of the 44% of respondents who said they'd experienced racism in the workplace, only 6% felt comfortable raising it with their line manager, senior personnel or HR. So that was something that we were talking about in the working group about how we can combat this. And then lastly, as you've mentioned as well, mobility within the sector. And just from that call, we established a kind of informal mentoring scheme between those in more senior positions who teamed up with junior members to offer guidance and mentoring sessions. So kind of just within the call, we matched some people off, and then they were going to start kind of an informal mentoring session from that. And crucially as well, from the point of view of ILPA, the working group highlighted that there's already a lot of amazing work being done on racial justice in the sector, and we were keen not to duplicate that work, but use the platform of ILPA to amplify those voices. So we've set up a resources page on the ILPA website called Anti-Racism Resources, and there's a section there called Resources for Black Lawyers, and we'll update that with key organisations that are already doing really great things, and we've got training that other people are doing that we'll highlight on that page too. I mean, I'm also really keen to get involved in this discussion on training, because I think it's a complicated issue for sure. So yes, we've listed organisations such as Bridging the Bar, Aspiring Solicitors, etc. And then I just finally wanted to highlight that it is an uncomfortable truth for white people, especially those who work in what is often considered a more liberal left-leaning sector like immigration lawyers, to come to terms with the fact that racism is not just something perpetrated by the Home Office, but is also perpetrated by organisations and by us as white people. And I think a way to keep the conversation moving forward and begin to enact change is to remove defensiveness from the conversation. So instead of saying, it's not me, I'm not racist, start asking, how have I consciously or subconsciously contributed to a racist system, and what can I do to change it? So then I've got a list of recommendations that came from the survey for ILPA that members think that ILPA should do, recommendations that ILPA members should do, and then recommendations for the immigration sector as a whole. And I'm happy to leave those and talk about those afterwards.
Well, thank you so much, Esme. It sounds really interesting in the report. I'm looking forward to hearing about the recommendations. And especially with what you mentioned about conversation fatigue, that was definitely picked up on last week as well. And it's quite interesting to hear that that was something quite prominent in the surveys that you did too. So that'll be a really good discussion point, and that Moni will be picking up about kind of what individuals have said about kind of those conversations sort of re-traumatizing them, and that this onus shouldn't really be on individuals to keep telling the same sort of accounts, and that is quite a difficult onus to place on an individual. So it'll be good to discuss that, and also what you mentioned about amplifying the work that others are doing as well. So thank you so much. One of our final panelists, Laurie Ann, should be hopefully joining us a little bit later, so we can move on to the discussion section now, while she's just logging in later on. If that's okay, Moni, if you want to go ahead and pick up on some of the really interesting points that you mentioned. Thanks for sharing your insights. We'll move on to the talking section.
Yeah, great, thank you so much to all of you. It sounds like there's quite a lot of good stuff that's happening, a lot of work in progress, a lot of stuff's already happening, and there's a lot of stuff in the works to kind of really drive change. So that's like, it's brilliant to hear, and it's really encouraging to hear as well. Yeah, so if I start off with, obviously a lot was highlighted and talked about at last week's session, but one of the kind of a really important issue that came up, and it's something that's come up in discussions about racism and when people share their experiences, and the need for anti-racism training. And for me, I'm not quite sure what that training looks like. And it would be good to get some more kind of, it'd be good to get your thoughts on what you think that should look like, what that does look like. But picking up on, I think, Sam and Jenny, maybe if we start with Jenny, in terms of, you mentioned that, sorry, you said there was training, there's mandatory training to magistrates and staff. So maybe if we could start off with talking about what that actually looks like, in terms of giving that, because I personally don't know what that looks like. So it'd be really good to kind of share that. And then maybe if we then move on to Sam, you mentioned that you're developing some anti-racism training, and it'd be really good to if you can share what's come up in the discussions, what you're looking at, what you found will definitely work, what you're considering. So maybe if we start off with Jenny first.
Okay. Yes, so in HMCTS, we've, for the last good few years, actually, we all have to undertake unconscious bias training, and that there is an online version, and well, there's 2 online versions, but we've also, with the legal advisors, taught it face to face just to bring it alive a little bit. So they've done, we have to work through modules and go through different scenarios, and you're presented with scenarios of people who express themselves in a certain way, and how you would, how you look at that situation, how you judge that situation. If you do, what options we think should be given to those people in those scenarios. And so it does provoke a lot of thought. So it's across the board of people who are staff, and incidents that happen in court, that kind of thing. So that's really good, and everybody has to do it and then talk about that in their appraisal afterwards, to kind of tease out what their learning points were and what they got from it. And it has to be done within a certain time scale, and people are chased up if they haven't done it. So there's no getting away from that. So that's really good. And also with the equal treatment bench book, we've added that to the magistrates training. So that's their induction training when they literally first turn up and they're brand new magistrates, and also their consolidation training. We have that, and actually one of the district judges delivers that in one of the areas. So that's really challenging. Obviously somebody else on the bench as well, which makes it quite powerful. So those are definitely moves in the right direction. I think where we probably need to continue evaluating is just understanding and responding to different learning styles, because not everybody gets everything in that one kind of way. We try to tackle it face to face and obviously on the modules, but afterwards the subsequent conversations with staff is a good way of teasing out what people have actually gained from that training. So that's that's how we've tackled it in HMCTS.
Can I ask, one of the things that came up last week was with the anti-racism training, it's about changing hearts and minds. And it's because it requires lots of internal work, and it's looking at yourself and how you see things, and possibly discovering uncomfortable truths about, oh my God, I never knew that's how I thought about something. And in terms of it's mandatory, which I think is a key element, because I guess for some people, if it was voluntary, but because of the nature of it, because it does potentially does require you to face some uncomfortable truths about yourself, and acknowledging that, people might think, well, I'm not going to benefit from this, so I don't want to take it. So do you think that mandatory element has really, I don't know if it started off as voluntary and moved to mandatory, but do you think making it a mandatory part, just making it mandatory, has really actually helped?
Yes, it has, and it's helped tackle different opinions, but also it helps to realise that HMCTS are serious about it, because we are race champions. That's one of the things that we stand for, and it's not just race that's tackled in the unconscious bias. It's all different, genders, sexuality, religion, all of that is tackled. And it's really helpful that it is mandatory, because nobody needs to start off being offended, because everybody's got to do it. But equally, it's followed up in terms of, because there's not many people that come out and realise and think that they couldn't have learned anything. We've also taken that forward in the recruitment side, because we've started to develop success profiling, and that's new in the last couple of years. So that is blind applications. So all we get is a number. So we don't know anything about that person. Everything that's personal about them is blocked out of the application when you look at it as a sifter. Mm-hmm. So the only time you see a name is when you're on the interview panel. And even then, it's set up in a way that the application is looked at for SIF, and then for interview it's a clean slate. So we tell the person the interview panel has not seen your application, so there is no room for that. And that this unconscious bias came up as part of that training as well, for people who do undertake the interviews or that sifting process. And I went on that training. It does weed out. You don't realise how you prejudge applications. Might not necessarily be a name or anything like that, but just certain information that comes along, or assuming, oh, this one's good and this one's not good, and all of that is weeded out because you're not part of each of those processes. And we found that the last round at HMCTS, we did a national campaign for trainees. Over 120 trainees have literally just been recruited, and it's quite interesting how diverse the groups are. So that definitely, I think, is a success. We've got way to go. We're not sort of the finished article, but that is definitely a success, and we're going to carry out a similar campaign next year.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jenny. That was really interesting to hear about, like, the unconscious bias aspect of it too, and definitely want to pick up on 1 or 2 points. Before I do, I just want to introduce Laurie Ann, who's just joined. Thanks so much for taking part today. Laurie Ann Power is the head of diversity at the Criminal Bar Association and is a barrister at 25 Bedford Row. And I'll just pass on over to her for her segment on kind of perspectives and sharing your thoughts, and then we'll move on to the discussion section and pick up on some things that you mentioned. But I'll just hand it over to you now, Laurie Ann. Thanks so much for joining. It's muted. No, it might be muted on. Bear with us for one. Let me have a look. I'm not sure if you can hear us. Okay, yeah, come back in and see if it works.
Well, I move on, just go back to Sam while Laurie Ann sorts out, hopefully.
Yeah, sure.
Sam, going back to the anti-racism training, you mentioned that you're developing some training. If you could share kind of what you're looking at and what shape that's in at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was interested in what Jenny was saying about the unconscious bias training, because I really sit on the fence with unconscious bias training, because I think there's very little evidence that it changes people's behaviours. I think it's useful raising awareness of this thing called unconscious bias, but is it actually making a difference? You know, you can read a million different articles on it, and there's very, very mixed views. But I think just seeing it as the solution and the panacea to all of our problems around racism or discrimination is a mistake. And it worries me when organisations think that they can simply deliver unconscious bias training and think that that's job done. I mentioned that we've developed some anti-racism training and some race awareness training. It's a very new product, so I can't sit here and say it's incredibly successful. It's something that we're going to be rolling out from November onwards. But we followed a model that we've used with other equality and diversity training, which is to make it very interactive and to make it very much around discussing scenarios that take place in barristers' everyday lives, within chambers, within the courts. And it gives people an opportunity to discuss how they feel as a result of certain scenarios. So it starts, I hope, with the anti-racism training that we're developing, that the scenarios will help to start exploring the microaggressions and the micro incivilities that practitioners face every day as part of their practice, and really ensure that people become a little bit more alive to those behaviours when they witness them, because I think quite often the white majority don't notice some of these behaviours. And I hope that the style of training that we're going to adopt will kind of enable a conversation. I mean, it's quite an ask, because we're going for a kind of 3-part training product, which involves a bit of learning and scenario discussions and discussing issues like white privilege, a controversial term, I know, but then asking people to go away and reflect and look at some materials, and then come back and discuss anti-racism, what more they can do to be an ally. So it's an unproven product at this point, but I'm very proud of the team that have been putting it together, and it's been barristers from right across the bar. So fingers crossed on it, but I hope we've got the model right.
And is this, with this training, is this something that you'll be how will you be pushing it out from November? So how will it be rolled out? Will it be?
Well,
Sorry, yeah.
We're hoping to support chambers in delivering it as much as possible, to kind of make sure that it's accessible to as many people. So we'll probably be doing train the trainer type events to support others in delivering these materials. And I want it to be freely accessible and able for, that anybody can use it, because for me it's such an important area for us to work on. And I meant to mention actually before about the mandatory nature. I think to some extent it's really important that this training is mandatory, because it sends a message by an employer or an organisation that this is incredibly important. But it also means that the people who should be there have to be there. And I see part of our mission is in making those people who don't think it's for them, or don't think they need to learn anything, or don't think it's an issue, realise that it is an issue. So I think I would be very much in favour of this type of training being mandatory right across the bar. And
did I don't know if other panelists had any views in terms of, this is something I think Jenny, you mentioned, but with the anti-racism training itself, how do you, obviously, for instance, somebody's given that training and that's good and it's mandatory. In terms of following up on it to make sure people don't lose what they've learned from that, did anyone have any particular thoughts, or has anything come up in conversations that were to be had in terms of making sure that training, should it be regular training? How do we kind of follow up on it to make sure that what's learned during that, what people discover about themselves, isn't lost?
No, I would agree with that actually, and I take on board some of the comments of dismay, and I think with HMCTS, obviously there's an attempt to do that because of the follow-up and the appraisal approach, but I do think it needs to be more regular. So I like the idea of breaking it up a little bit and doing it bit by bit, because there's a lot to tackle, and it's whether those things that you learn are lasting and have that impact that you want to have. So although we have to do this annually and the course does change, it's not just repeating the same thing. I think that's something I'd like to take back actually, as to how we can do more regular, or maybe smaller chunks to reinforce that.
I think it's important to support training with kind of other maybe little events. So I was at a similar event to this a few months ago, and somebody had said they'd gone to, I think, their chambers, they'd come up with the idea of like a anti-racism book club, or like an anti-colonial book club. And I think it's really important to maybe read kind of certain books and have those discussions and kind of continue the discussion. So it's not just, once a year when you do the training, you just kind of, it's a dialogue that keeps on going, so people are able to keep on learning, because these terminology and understanding changes all the time. So it's really important, I think, for staff and kind of members to, keep up with that.
Great. No, if Laurie Ann's...
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay, thanks guys, sorry. I think, but just by tuning in for the past 10-15 minutes, I think you guys have probably covered the most important factors when considering how it is that we can, I think someone said, change hearts and minds, because we didn't get here overnight. And I think I have to just correct, I'm not head of diversity at the Criminal Bar Association, but I do deal with, you know, diversity and inclusion. I think for me personally, one of the things we need to ensure is that at the same time we are pushing training in relation to microaggressions and white privilege and anti-racism, we are also making sure that we let people know that this is very much a profession that is worthy of them. Because I have found what's been happening is that many of the young people that I speak to say, well, actually, we've heard so much about the racism at the bar. Why on earth would we want to come? One of the only ways that we can genuinely tackle the issue of racism is by representation. And we have to make sure that at the same time, we are changing from within, we are opening the doors for those people to come from outside. And I know just working with Sam on the working group, it's just so amazing. For the first time in 21 years in the profession, I am seeing and hearing people who genuinely really want to embrace change. But the danger is that we do this now because this is the year for it all to be done. People don't have much else to do. We can sit down and form groups and sit on Zoom. But when the real world opens back up next year, I think that's going to be the real test. And I think it was Sam who was saying, and maybe Jenny, was saying this is where it's important for all of the associations to ensure that chambers and the other institutions that serve the bar have mandatory training and continuous training. We need to make anti-racism training like we make vulnerable witness training, like we make continual professional development. It has to stand head and head with the mandatory continual progress of ensuring a standard of excellence, diversity and inclusion. And I think that, as I say, I am actually genuinely for the first time of the mindset that we are making some genuine real progress. That being said, I am also sometimes astounded by the number of people, white, black and Asian, who say, actually, is this really a problem? Is this a problem that we're ever going to fix? Are we just paying lip service to it because the whole world at the moment is paying lip service to it? Now, I think someone was speaking about who needs the training. Now, don't come to me about anti-racism training. It shouldn't be black, brown and Asian people who are sitting in the room on the Zoom, spending their evenings discussing anti-racism training. The judges, the politicians, the people with the money, the educational institutions, those are the people who need to talk about what anti-racism really means, because we can change things at our level. If there is a problem, as it is, which is systemic racism, we're not going to be able to change it anytime soon. We can start the conversation, but where racism is systemic, we need to really go to the core of the problem. So for example, we've been sitting on a LAMI review about the criminal justice system for years. This is a review that was commissioned by both governments, and it goes to the heart of systemic racism within the criminal justice system. And I think maybe one of a number of recommendations by LAMI have been implemented over the past, I think, number of years now. So yes, it's great work that's being done by the Bar Council, the Bar Standards Board, the Criminal Bar Association. We're all doing the right things in terms of getting the training going. But what we really need is we need to engage those people who can make the genuine changes from above and also from the bottom. We also need to make sure that we are open for business to all people, and people don't just think, well, the bar's a racist institution, I'm not interested.
Thank you very much for that. That was really good to hear. I mean, another thing that came up at last week's event was the importance of allies and what an effective ally actually looks like. Maybe if we could, maybe Hekim, if we can start with you in terms of, based on what you've seen, the discussions you've had, the work you've done, the work that your firm done, the work that your firm has done, the committees you sit on, what to you, what's an effective ally look to you? Oh, I think you're on mute, Hekim.
Okay, thank you. I think that the first thing we need to know is about, I think we spoke about education and people have talked about training. And there is a lot of uncomfortable discussions to be had. I mean, I've had discussions with my friends inside of work and outside of work, and some of them have not been nice. I'll be honest. Sometimes I've spoken to people and they've been in tears about what we're talking about and the discussion we've had, because I've thought, hang on, I've known you for 10 years and you're asking these very basic questions about race and racism. How have you not thought about this before? How's this not entered your mind before? And how do you actually know who I am if this hasn't entered your mind? And you know, people will get defensive about things because they feel as though they're being attacked. And I think it all comes down to people talked about unconscious bias training before, and I agree that you can't just throw people at unconscious bias training and say that's it, have that. But I think one good thing that comes out of it is people learn that everyone has some level of unconscious bias, whether you're male, whether you're female, whether you're black, whether you're Asian, whether you're white, everyone has that level of unconscious bias, which creates a spectrum and a grey area within that. And I think the difficulty talking about race is it's just always broken down in almost such a binary thing that you say the wrong thing or you ask the wrong question and all of a sudden you're racist. And people are so scared of anyone else thinking that they're racist is that they hold back, they don't ask the questions, or they say the wrong thing in the wrong way, and then that they feel the guilt about it and they say, oh no, I didn't mean it like that, oh my god, you must think something. And one of the things that we were looking at within our firm is having a panel discussion, and it will be the people who are from the ethnic minorities who will be on the panel to start with. But one of the things we're looking at is people to actually, those questions that people think are difficult, send them in anonymously and we'll pull them together, we'll pull the similar ones together, and then we will answer those questions. And I think one of the things we talked about earlier is about processing. Now, if I'm in a room with 10 of my white colleagues and we're talking about race, they're going to have a very different conversation if I step out of the room, because they'll be more comfortable talking about certain things because they're not scared that if they just slip up a little bit, in inverted commas, slip up in inverted commas a little bit, that I won't think, oh my god, that they're racist. And I think it's about learning a bit and processing and moving through that. And I think we have to get away from this thing that, you know, if you say the wrong thing that you're a racist, and we have to look at race and all the factions within that more like a spectrum, and not in a binary way. And we're all learning, we're all progressing through this. You know, there's people who know far more about this than I do, and I know more now than I did 5 years ago through learning, education, and discussing. And we all know, you know, hopefully we all know more now. We know more now than we did it at the end of May when you know, the circumstances surrounding George Floyd's death happened. So it's all a process, and we all appreciate that, and we can't be scared to have the conversation. But we're only as good as the least educated among us. So if we're sitting in a firm and there's 20, 30 people there, and this is why it's good to have the mandatory training that everyone else has said, if 4 or 5 people haven't had the training, what then happens is within 6 months' time, when everyone's learning and processing and moving on, a year's time, they're not going through that process, but also now they're even more afraid to ask questions or say the wrong thing, because now they're thinking, well, okay, I don't know any of this, and I'm just going to keep my mouth up. But then what happens then is it's the more likely to say the wrong thing, because if you look at what was acceptable 10, 15 years ago, or wouldn't be challenged, I think acceptable is the wrong word, but wouldn't be challenged 10, 15 years ago, and what would be challenged now. And again, that comes down to allyship. You want to be able to recognize, to be a good ally, you want to be able to recognize those situations where, say, I'm in a place of work or somewhere else where something happens or someone says something. It shouldn't be me having to stand up and explain why that isn't acceptable. If you're a good ally, you can do that, whether that's in the supermarket, whether that's in work, or in a social situation. And some of the things that we're looking at, I think education is important. Recognize privilege. That's not just about white privilege, because we're looking at intersectionality here. We're looking at, everyone has a certain level of privilege, whether that's because you're male, whether that's because you went to an independent school or a private school or anything else. So I think we need to recognize that within ourselves, recognize how we've benefited from that, and recognize how we can then look at society and how we can see the people who haven't had that and recognize that within them. Talking about intersectionality, I mean, someone mentioned before, I think it's Esme, about the term BAME, and we're moving away from that, well, which is great because we have to look at that. We have to look at, you know, the experiences of someone who is Black growing up in this country is different from someone who is of Indian heritage, who's Bangladeshi heritage, because there is those differences, and the danger with everyone grouping everything together, you know, the only thing you have in common is that you're not white, which is racist within itself. So it is good that, okay, we've had this term BAME, which most people aren't happy with, but people are now moving away from, and that's a very good thing to see, because people now do understand the differences between those groups. You can't be passive, you have to be active, you have to go away, and people have said, you know, you have to be anti-racist, because otherwise you're just maintaining the status quo, which is you're enabling the systemic racism in society. Both on a micro and a macro level, to just move along. If you're not doing anything anti-racist because you say, oh, I'm a good person, yeah, I'm nice to everyone, I don't see color, I treat everyone fairly, well, that means that I don't have to do anything because I'm nice, I can just carry on with my life. Well, yeah, you can, but you're carrying on with your life in a society that's racist. So you're accepting that you don't think that society needs to change. But in order to be active, you need to just, I think it is helpful to have people to talk to, have people to process things, read more. And if you're not sure about something, is ask questions, because people will always help you and explain things to you, but there isn't necessarily a right and wrong answer. You can ask us certain questions and we'll all give you a different answer about why we think this is right or something else right. I think one of the ways that we fall down, and it's been mentioned before today, is about representation and visibility. You look out there and you see, okay, where are the Black and Asian lawyers? I did a talk about 7 or 8 years ago in the University of Huddersfield in Oldham, which does have a very high ethnic minority a number of students there. And I remember giving that talk and someone said, I've never seen a lawyer who isn't white. I didn't actually realize that they went there, and we are there. But when you see lawyers, you know, on TV or giving interviews or on the radio, unless there's a question about race, you very rarely see someone in that situation. And that is, you know, even if you look on things like the lawyers who are prominent on Twitter and Instagram, it's the same thing. So we do have to do more to get ourselves out there more, and not just within this environment, but raise our profiles as much as we can.
On visibility, because that's something that came up last week in terms of how, you know, just BAME lawyers just need to be more visible. And something that came up, questions that came up, were things like pupillage applications, QC applications, in terms of supporting people in those applications. I don't know if any panelists had thoughts on how you make, you know, for instance, when a chambers or a law firm, for instance, when there's a discussion, who you put forward, it's, you know, that's important. You know, you don't just, you know, you know, put your, you know, when you look at who you put forward, you know, are there any Black lawyers amongst your list of people?
In relation to pupillage, very quickly. So I've been chair of pupillage for the past 3 years at 2.5 years at 25 Bedford Road. We've kind of changed the system. We now do our first round marking blind. So we strip away names, we strip away date of birth, we strip away gender, we strip away anything that might indicate gender, ethnicity, age. The only thing that we haven't yet done, which we're in a discussion about, is about the educational institution. So we've left the raw details, but we've stripped away anything that relates to identity. Now, that's a gift and a curse, because sometimes someone, their heritage may be one of their strengths for a number of different reasons. But what we've found in the past 3 years in our chambers, we have taken on about 60 to 70% non-white pupils. So every year we've had at least 2 minority pupils. I think our intake the year before last was the only one where we hadn't, but year gone, year coming. Now, obviously, once we get to the rounds where we need to do advocacy and we need to do training and those kind of interviews, we have to see people. So obviously, we can't interview blind, so we see them. But by that point, what we've managed to do is filter few on the basis of the application. And then once we see them, obviously, then we have to incorporate and we have to encourage people to actually say, look, people say you don't see colour, but the reality is you do see colour. You do see colour, and it's not a bad thing to see colour. People shouldn't be afraid to see colour. If someone has moved here and English isn't their first language, and they've managed to ace their law degree, and they've managed to take on a number of different things, then that's a relevant factor. That's part of their character. It's part of who they are, part of their. And so we shouldn't ignore these things. We've got to be careful that we don't try and strip away identity in the pursuit of equality. We've got to use our ethnicity as a strength as well. And so I think that the process of maybe blanking out names, blanking out gender works to a certain extent, but the training really kicks in once you get past that first hurdle and you're interviewing people face to face. And it seems to be working. It really does seem to be working.
And do you think when it comes to, like I mentioned this last week, the Crown Prosecution Service, I think when it comes to their recruitment, they do the blind CV process, I think. Is that something, I don't know if how many law firms and chambers do that, but is that something you'd like to see more law firms and chambers doing?
I think we have to be careful what we wish for, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to eradicate all traces of who we are. We want to be accepted for who we are and in spite of who we are. And so I think while we're going through this process of working out what works, we're trying to reverse 400 years of systemic racism. And so it's trial and error. And so if in the first part we have to strip away names, strip away gender, and that works, then yes, I think we have to figure out, what I don't think is beneficial is for us to completely, for want of a better word, whitewash the whole process and then see what we've got at the end. We want people to say, look, actually, I always say, go to school, I say to young Black boys and girls, your colour, your ethnicity, your gender, they are some of your strongest attributes. I think that being a Black woman in this profession has taken me further forward than it has held me back. I don't want people to ignore that fact. And so I think it's about just striking the right balance.
And just going back to, and just discussing visibility again, I was looking at some judicial diversity statistics, because one area where there seems to be little visibility of, for instance, Black lawyers is in the senior ranks of the judiciary. So I looked at the latest judicial diversity statistics, which were published in September, and there were, as at 1st of April, there were 3,174 court judges, and there are 107 Asian or Asian British judges and 32 Black or Black British judges. And when you do start to see numbers for Black and Black British judges, it's 4 circuit judges out of 669, and 12 Black or Black British recorders out of 874. In terms of, I guess this is where those judicial applications come in. What more can be done, or what is being done to support people, to support BAME lawyers in, for instance, their judicial applications? Is there, what was done? Is there more being done to support that? Because that the judiciary seems to be one area where greater visibility is really, really needed.
Are you happy for me to speak to this?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a program that's actually being run at the joint MOJ, JAC, Judicial Office, and then all the professional bodies program, which is called Pre-Application Judicial Education, which is a positive action program of workshops and resources and discussions led by judges. that we've been quite heavily involved in developing. It's been running for about a year now, and people from ethnic minority groups and women and lawyers with disabilities have priority on accessing this programme. And it's just an opportunity to look at judgecraft skills and increase confidence in making an application and really understanding whether a judicial appointment is something that you want. So it's very early in the programme to see whether it's having some significant success, but we are beginning to get emails from alumni through the programme who have been successful in their judicial appointments. So there are programmes like that. There's a range of programmes. There needs to be more. We need to do more work around this. And I think that all the professional bodies are quite committed to supporting the Judicial Office and the JAC in making progress. But it kind of also goes back, I think, a little to a point I made right at the beginning around work and the work that you get and the importance of getting the right type of work to support your judicial application and your confidence in yourself with your career, and for silk applications too. So I think there are a number of things that we can do which are particularly around the process, mentoring and support and preparation for judicial appointment. But I think there are more fundamental things that need to be done around how we develop our practices for our members and ensuring that the right sort of briefs go to diverse barristers so that everybody has an opportunity to progress.
Great. Something that came up last week was scholarships, and one of the panelists said, especially during COVID, law firms and chambers are under huge financial pressures. And a suggestion that was made, and Edwina, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, was take the pressure off the chambers and to improve social diversity. Maybe the Inns of Court could maybe fund pupilages and set up a fund where law firms and barrister chambers might contribute to, but the Inns fund pupilages, and within that pupillage round have someone, maybe a set number from who've been to state school, because I think one of the things that came up with, for instance, certainly with judicial appointments, is that you might see kind of diversity in the sense that there might be a few more women in the list, or you'll see in their biographies, such and such was the first person in their family to go to university. But one of the things that many of the successful applicants have in common is that they went to Oxford or Cambridge, and educational, in terms of the educational background, there's lots of similarities. And in terms of just improving social mobility, we need more people from state schools, and having this funding this pupillage and having a set number of people from state schools will go a great deal towards improving that social mobility. I just want to get your thoughts on that, Edwina.
I think it's an interesting one. I think a lot of the events that I've been to recently, there's been kind of an onus on, or questions about, having specific scholarships for, you use the term again, but BAME students and supporting them that way. So I think the pupillage question, I think, is one that I haven't really come across before, because I don't sit within the scholarships team. But with regards to kind of the scholarships that we do offer at the moment, we do, it is important kind of when going through that process to have like a diverse panel that's interviewing students, so that they can see and feel kind of represented and feel kind of comfortable when they are going through the process. So we've worked really hard to make sure our panels are diverse, and I think that goes some way into informing and kind of demystifying the fact that you have to be from, a Russell Group University or an Oxbridge, or gone to Oxbridge to get a certain award from the Inns.
And
just in relation to the pupillage, there is the Inns that there is actually in place. it's called the COIC, which is a matched funding scheme where the inns match the funding, pupillage funding, for chambers who may not financially be able to offer 2 pupillage on that year. They offer 1, or they may not have been offering any pupillage. They may try to, you know, so there is the 4 inns have got together to try and do what they call a matched pupillage funding scheme, where for chambers who maybe it's normally criminal sets of chambers or chambers that don't have a huge amount of financial resources, they can match the funding to either bolster the pupillage award or to allow for a second pupillage award. But what they don't do, I don't think they can do, is to fund pupillage directly for the chambers, because obviously it's an investment by that chambers for that chambers in the long run. So there is a scheme out there, but not quite as.
I think there's also, I think during obviously COVID, there's a scheme that the inns are participating in, I think through the Marshall Hall Trust to, you know, support particularly practitioners from the criminal bar. So there is kind of, you know, helping them with funding during this period as well. I think it should be important to note that the inns are trying to help and support.
The inns are doing an amazing, they really have committed to trying to tackle this case, and they're really putting their money where their mouth is, essentially. It's not just playing lip service. So there is, certainly I know a lot of people, myself included, who wouldn't have been here but for funding from the inn. So I think a lot of people don't know that the inn is accessible on many different levels. So just go, just call up and ask, you'll be surprised.
Great. And Esme, you mentioned during your 5-minute segment that ILPA did a survey on, I think it was exploring racism in the immigration sector, is that correct? Could you just, it'd be great to hear kind of what questions you asked and what came out of that survey.
Yes, yeah, it had 3 main strands. So we first looked at whether our members as immigration practitioners had experienced racism within their workplace. And then we looked at whether their clients had experienced racism from judicial bodies. And then we also asked, let me just get it up, sorry, give me 1 second. No, okay, doesn't matter. Yeah, so it was kind of the different strands of how racism is experienced in the immigration sector as a whole. We got about 80 respondents, and the majority had said that yes, they had experienced workplace racism in the workplace, that I think 80% said their clients had experienced racism, and then that the third stream was about HR and about whether they felt they could raise the racism that they'd experienced, and as I said in my 5 minutes, that only 6% felt they were able to discuss it. So that was kind of something that ILPA really wanted to look at and see what we could do to help. Obviously these like formal channels of reporting racism are really, really difficult, and picking up from what Hekim said as well about being an effective white ally in situations like that, I think that like the senior management, whether it's training, whether it's unconscious bias training or something else, do really need to be aware of how they respond to reports of racism, because I think what came out of it was that there was a whole host of reasons why people felt that they weren't able to raise it as a concern. They had said they'd been dismissed before, been accused of being guilty of playing the race card, and that kind of microaggression level of racism, which is so hard to explain to someone that doesn't experience it, often is dismissed and not taken seriously. So there was so many levels to how it was really difficult to raise. And following on from what everyone's saying about training as well, ILPA really want to have a more interactive, more hands-on kind of training with this HR kind of situation. So that's what we're developing next, to kind of see how we can contribute to helping people discuss it more freely and easily. And I think on the white ally point as well, is that I definitely think white people don't have a good vocabulary about how to talk about this kind of stuff. I think for so long it's been pushed under the carpet and no one wants to say the word black or race, or no one wants to talk about it. But what that actually does is hides and obscures people's actual experiences, and then makes people feel like minorities in their workplaces and they can't speak up about anything. So I'm in two minds about the training, because I agree with everything that you've said about training potentially not always having the best impact if it's not backed up with reading and further internal unlearning. But then also people do need training because they do need to learn. There needs to be a massive cultural shift about how we view this, and sometimes training can only spark one thing, and someone else is gonna take something from that and then tell their friends, and then it gets the ball rolling. So yeah.
I mean, do any of the panelists think, reverse mentoring, do you think there's a big role for that in terms of improving understanding of people's experiences and raising awareness, or having someone where you can confide in if something has happened? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. Laurie, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about education, isn't it? So it's beneficial if you have someone who, so for example, the judges did a scheme at the Bailey where they would be reverse mentored by some of the young people that would come in from colleges and schools and explain how they felt the criminal justice system treated them. And it was, the first time some of these judges had ever had conversations outside of the courtroom with just normal people, young kids from schools. And I know that lots of lessons were learned. So I think, it's about, yes, reverse mentoring. In short, I think it's beneficial because it's teaching you a perspective that you wouldn't otherwise have, and that's always useful. But instead of just saying, let's just do reverse mentoring, you've got to be willing and open to, first of all, accept that that is the experience of someone. So it's no good just saying, I'm going to listen, let's sit down. It can be quite patronizing to have a group of people from, Black, Asian background and say, this is how we feel, you should learn this from us. We are not the ones with the problem. Don't come to me to teach you how to deal with a problem that you created and a problem that you continue to benefit from. Because I'd be a fool if I expect and I think that that's going to work. But if it's a part of a bigger program, a bigger plan, then of course I'm happy to sit down and say to I say to my colleagues all the time, as someone said earlier on, people are uncomfortable with the conversation. So yes, if you can have a situation where people who are on the receiving end of discrimination mentor, explain, discuss their experiences, then fine. But the reality is, everyone knows. This isn't a secret. It's the elephant in the room. And we're dealing with intelligent people. This profession is amongst the most group of people that exists on the planet. We are lawmakers. We deal with a very, very sophisticated process of justice across the board. We can tackle the issue of racism. You don't need me to tell you. And so I think for some things, reverse mentoring does work when we're talking about just a general life experience, but actually tackling the real issue, the root cause of the issues, I think it has limited, level of assistance, really.
Are there any other initiatives that that any of you are looking at or working on which haven't actually been discussed that much, but is in the works that you kind of wanted, that you're able to highlight that could potentially make a difference? We have talked about anti-racism training is probably the biggest one, but is there anything else that's come up in the work that's been done to improve understanding that could actually have a, you know, real beneficial effect if it's kind of adopted more widely?
So one of the things we've done in our firm over the last 6 or 7 months, so this is pre-May, is we started a network for all the people who are Asian and who are Black and part of an ethnic minority. Because when you start somewhere, and our work, I'll be honest, the numbers aren't great in terms of ethnic minorities when you look at the percentages. And it's one of the things I looked at before I started working there. You know, will I be comfortable in this environment? Will people know who I am? Will people get who I am? Will I have to be myself, or will I have to be, in inverted commas, a white version of myself? And I think one of the great things is, I mean, we started the network sort of February time, and then obviously lockdown happened. But our first few meetings were on this platform through Teams and Zoom, and it was just great. I mean, we've got maybe 900, 1,000 people within our firm across 5 offices, but to actually look across and see 40, 50 brown faces, I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize there's this many people there. And then when you talk, you know that people are going to get what you say. You don't have to explain everything. And you know there's people there who will support you. And I think there's been a lot over the past 6 months in terms of people who've had to explain things, and people who've had to almost relive certain elements of their life, or certain things that have happened, to explain, well, this is what happened, this is why racism exists, because this happened to me. I can't put it more bluntly than that, but you tell those stories and you hear those stories, and there is a certain level of trauma that comes with that. And you can't, people have said this today, you can't expect people to keep saying that, because it's not necessarily our problem to fix. It's a problem that we can identify, but it's someone else's problem to fix. But it's good to have people there who will call you up and check up on you and say, actually, how are things going with you? And how we're going to have another meeting in a couple of weeks to talk about what our firm has done in Black History Month, how we found Black History Month, how it's been different this year than it has been last year, not just within the firm, but just generally, that there's a far more events like this going on. There's far more sort of wider acceptance of it. There's far more wider sort of publicity of it, and how we all feel about that. Because right now, I can't process that. I mean, we're not at the end yet. But I'm looking forward to having that conversation with my colleagues. And I think being part of something like that, when you necessarily haven't had that before in work, whether that's within your firm or within a separate group or organization, I think it's such an important thing. And when we looked at things like mentoring as well, when you've got people who are not as qualified as you, or coming through the ranks, and the people who are more senior to you, if you don't have that within your firm, you've got that within that group. And I think just trying to be part of something where you have that almost that comfort blanket there, it's something that I think it's something that everyone should try and be part of, because it does give you a great level of not necessarily acceptance, but somewhere where it gives you that level of comfort. And there's people there who are going to look out for you, and they will just, if you have a conversation with you, they'll just get it without you having to go through having to think, do I want to explain this to this person, and will they ask the wrong questions, or will they believe me, or will they think I'm overreacting, or am I just, did I just see that the wrong way? They'll just sit and listen, and they'll understand. And I think that's a massive thing to have. So I think that's one thing that we haven't really discussed so far, but which is important.
Great. Thank you very much for that. I'm just conscious of time, so if we, I'll just kind of, if I could get just almost final thoughts from each of the speakers, just based on kind of I don't know how much you were able to watch of last week's session, but also based on tonight's discussion, kind of your key takeaway. I mean, it already sounds like there's a lot of work going on, which, again, as I said earlier, is brilliant to see. But just what your key takeaway from tonight, in terms of what you'll kind of either feedback to colleagues, or kind of what's kind of really struck you from tonight that will be on your mind when you do go back and return to kind of the work that you're doing to help improve diversity. If we start off with, if I go in the order of the speakers, Sam, maybe if we start off with you.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think the most important thing to take away is really the need for this to be a long-term program. The need to recognise that all attention is on this issue at the moment, and then next year it could be the next thing. And I think it's really important that the programs and the work that we put in place, we see it through into the end. We recognise that we need to be in this for the long haul, and we need to be delivering these programs for the long haul. We need to be evaluating what's working, making sure that we're giving them the commitment that they need, that this is, a central issue that we absolutely have to tackle. And it's not going to be done in months, and it's possibly not going to be done in a year or two, or even more than that. And we have to keep at it until we start to have more impact.
Right, Hekim?
Yeah, I think I'll follow on from what Sam has said then and said before. We have the training now, but we do need to follow up in 3 months and 6 months' time. This time next year, we can't be having these same conversations about we all need training and we all have to start at zero and move upwards. We have to move on. We have to take everyone with us. The people who are most reluctant, and I think that this has come up before, the people who are most reluctant, we need to make sure that everyone comes with us and we don't leave people behind.
Jenny?
Yeah, I would say that as well, with the training and also working on the visibility of role models and representation, where it starts to really look, you start to get the benefit of what the training that's been put into place, and also just linking these initiatives. HMCTS have also got what we call RISE network, which is the MOJ Proud, which is for BAME staff, but it's just linking all of those things so that people can see how it would benefit us in the long run, rather than sort of little clubs and clusters. So that's something I'm going to take away.
Edwina?
I think I'll just kind of link to what everybody's already said. I think it is realising that this is a long-term project, to kind of echo what Sam was saying. And it's just about advertising, I think, the programs and the work that's already been done, because there is a lot of work being done. There's so much further to go as well. So I think it's recognizing that and working and building on that, and realizing there's levels of privileges that we need to keep on having these conversations, and getting people to understand that racism is not specifically always just overt. There are microaggressions that we need to talk about, and there are terminologies that we need to discuss, and kind of get into the kind of normal lexicon so people understand how to make that change as well. So yeah, I would say that.
Esme?
Yeah, absolutely agree with everything that's been said. Definitely getting it into the lexicon, making sure that we're not just paying lip service, and like Jenny said, like making sure we're all cohesive and all working together and keeping on having these conversations, and making sure that we all know what each other are doing. And it was positive as well, I feel like, this session, because I feel we all brought something positive about what we're all doing, and that I feel like everyone on this call is like working to make long-lasting change, which is amazing. And also something that Laurie said, which was don't strip away identity in the pursuit of equality, I really liked, and I'll definitely take that back.
Great. Laurie? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, completely agree with what everyone has said. And Sam says it best in terms of the longevity. We're in this for the long haul. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of this overnight. But just to add an extra element to that is that whatever institutions you work for or you work within, they can't do this cheaply. And they can't use the Black and Asian members of their organisations to be the mouthpiece for this. This is going to take real investment of time, but also financial investment. There are experts out there. There are courses. This is something that you're going to have to commit to wholeheartedly. So get this incorporated into your budget. Each institution should have a budget every year for diversity and inclusion, whether that's part of a training program, which is over and above an hour Zoom call, that's free, that you can do in your afternoon. This is proper training from professionals that cost money, and they cost money because they're damn good at what they do. And so, yeah, I think financial investment of time, and we're in it for the long haul.
Right. Well, it sounds, as I said, it sounds like there's lots of good work happening, and kind of looking forward to seeing kind of what things happening over the next few months, because I think we are, from what I can tell, based on last week's discussion and what you already said tonight, there well, fingers crossed, we're going to actually really start to see some really good and important change over the next few months. So that's brilliant to hear. I'll hand over to Hafsah.
Thank you very much, everyone, for participating and your kind of contributions. And just to kind of pick up on one final point that Laurie was mentioning as well, it really does cross over to a point that was mentioned last week about, you know, individuals taking part are lawyers, and there are, you know, great race experts who should be incorporated, and that there is this financial aspect to it too. And it was similar to a point mentioned by Abigail Johnson from the same chambers, and it's definitely interesting that you both picked up on the same point, because it is important to incorporate those that have studied and spent, you know, so much time and resource investigating, you know, why there actually is this issue underlying the system, and to definitely, you know, encourage those individuals to take part in training and not to place the onus on representatives at firms that, you know, are kind of just gone through as a default, and that should definitely change. So I'm glad that you mentioned that as a final point. And thank you everyone for your contributions. These conversations are absolutely vital, and it was a real honour to have co-chaired this with yourselves and kind of the regulatory bodies that are represented tonight. And I'm looking forward to seeing where the discussion goes next and kind of continue to make progress. Just before we go, I just wanted to mention an event taking place tomorrow that individuals might be interested in. It's the APPG event on legal aid, the Westminster Commission Sustainability Legal Aid. It's got a really interesting panel with expert witnesses, and all the details are in this Eventbrite link, which I'll just post. If any of the audience are interested in that, I'll just post it in the Q&A. Before we leave. And yeah, so just check out that event, and also the in stuff. I'm going to be joining the BAME at the bar event that you mentioned, Edwina. So yeah, thank you all for sharing all your contributions. We'll definitely be tweeting some things out and sharing the recording. If anyone is fine with that, just message if there's any points that you want to mention. We can definitely edit things as well, but I'm really glad that we're able to share this narrative with others that weren't able to join us tonight. So thank you all so much again for continuing these conversations, and the audience for participating as well. I'm going to close the event here, and thank you very much.